So often when you're hiring a senior leader, you're not just looking for someone to come in and fill a role, you're looking oftentimes for a thought partner.
I think that's amazing as a person to have an opportunity to come in with a high EQ leader that cares enough to have that convo.
And so I love posting these roles online because I like to see the senior leaders who still have it in them, that still want to go and find their path into that role.
Every executive hire, if it's a mishire, it's a year to a year and a half mistake.
To go back to parents, I'll double click on that. I find that they have oftentimes incredible EQ.
Yes.
They tend to be wonderful people leaders because they are people leaders at home.
Welcome to How I Hire, the podcast where we talk with senior go-to-market leaders about how they find, vet, attract, and grow new talent. My name is Andy Mowat, founder of Whisper. Today, I'm joined by Patty DuChene. Patty's the SVP of Marketing and Growth at Sendoso, formerly CRO at Postal. I love how those two companies came together. I was on team Sendoso. Now I'm getting the two teams coming together is amazing. Before that, Patty had a great run at Reich, where she started as an AE and grew all the way up into sales leadership. So Patty, great to have you here. Congratulations.
Well, thank you. Thanks for having me.
I've been looking forward to this conversation for a while. You just went from CRO at one company to now joining another company and bringing two great brands in the direct gifting space together. I'd be fascinated to hear how you think about evaluating the team when you're just coming on and kind of the responsibility and scope that you're taking on. And how do you think about where are those holes and opportunities to grow the team?
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting to be in this position where you're acquired by your biggest competitor. You spend, every waking hour scheming on how you're going to defeat them in a deal cycle or a renewal cycle or against them from a brand perspective. And now I find myself trying to build a brand vision for that exact same company. When I started, I've only been in my role for now 45 days here at Sendoso, so I'm still very fresh. But one of the first things I did was I took stock of all of the areas that I was intimidated by as their competitor.
Wow.
And I figured out how is it that they accomplished the things that, made me nervous when I was, the CRO over at Postal, and understand how they did that. I then wanted to look at where are the areas that they acknowledged we were stronger and how can we build roles and swim lanes and support those key areas. My background, as you stated, is definitely in sales. So I have spent a meaningful amount of time trying to figure out how sales and marketing work together, because I've been on that side of the negotiation table and I have a tremendous amount of empathy and, support to that team because I've been there and that's a really hard gig. And I feel that we have a really great opportunity to own this space. There's not a lot of differences between both companies, probably why the acquisition made a lot of sense. A lot of shared core values and ultimately a shared mission. So really grateful to be here.
I love that. I think that's a whole fun topic in a separate podcast that is really neat as well too. I saw that happen when I was at Elance and we merged with Odesk. I remember how I've always thought about competition. I remember deeply when at Culture Amp, we were competing heavily with Lattice, and I still to this day, I'm it's just time to come together and make something bigger. I bet it must have been really fun to go look at the battle cards and see how they were depositioning against you and vice versa, and talk about those deals that you'd lost to them or they'd lost to you. Those are just some fun stories. You probably had some great beers with people already.
Oh, and the best part is talking about the deals that you knew were hyper competitive. There's one in particular that the head of sales over here at Sendoso, one of the first conversations I had with him during the diligence process, he was like that deal. He's like, I took a whole day off after we lost that deal. And so there's certain ones that you really remember. And so it's been very fun to kind of see both sides of the coin in many of those engagements. But for many of our customers, they're also oh, now you're on the same team. I don't have to choose. I get the best of both worlds, but yeah, absolutely.
There is a little bit of, when you're competing against somebody, you're always I competed heavily with Lattice and I never really became friends with any of those people while I was there. But once I left, I'd become really good friends with 5 or 6 of the people. And so it's nice to do that and know that people are good people on your side. That's neat. Well, how do you evaluate the team you take over and figure out where are the opportunities where are the roles that you need to hire for, or you need to invest in? How do you approach that?
So I did this in a really boring way. I actually took every single person's JD that was on the team.
You put it in chat or no?
I took everyone's JD that they had been hired as. And so most of the marketing team was under like a year and 10 years. So it's actually a very fresh team, bar 2 people who had been here for quite some time. And I took everyone's JD and I then went and had everyone self-assess on like where they're actually spending their area, their focus time. And I found that there were like a tremendous amount of holes. There were for 2 primary reasons. One is that the JDs didn't match the scope that people were given when they started. There were some adjustments due to business requirements. And then 2, there were areas that the business needed more work than was previously, thought during the hiring process. So they were occupying stuff like say 10% of the time, they were taking 40%, and therefore other things were dropping off. After that self-assessment, I then went and I looked at every single person's background that was currently on the team, what they had accomplished. Because again, the team was new. Like I think the most tenured person was 8 months at the time. And so I went and I said, okay, what is their background? Where do they have experience? And then also asked them, like, where are the areas based off of your now 8 to 6 months or 4 months in role? Where do you think you can make the biggest impact? With that information, and then as well as my assessment, and I've been in the role here for 45 days, but I've been at Sendoso now for 4 months. Mm-hmm. I was like, here's, I also had my 2 cents to contribute. I then redefined every single person's roles.
I think that's amazing as a person to have an opportunity to come in with a high EQ leader that cares enough to have that convo, because a lot of people probably have, like, if you haven't had that convo with somebody, and generally I always say, like, once you've hit 90 days with your manager, that's what it's going to be like for the rest of the time. And so for you to come and like take a sniff test and, hey, does this feel right to you? Does this feel right? Like, do we have you doing the right things? Probably is a whole up level for the entire team.
And what I really wanted is, I wanted everyone to feel like they had an area that they can leave fingerprints. Like there should be an area of this business that you can look back on and be like, I did that. Like that was mine. And I wanted to make sure that everybody felt really good about that. And I give the team a lot of credit because while it was a tremendous amount of work on my side, trying to redefine this and then getting approval from all of the powers that be, it required a ton of flexibility from the team. Like I told them up front that I was going to do this. And I have no idea behind closed doors how they took that. To my face, they were like, okay, sounds good. But behind closed doors, I wouldn't have blamed them if they're like, oh my God, new manager and she's redefining everything in new swim lanes. But 45 days after, we're already pumping out a ton of work. Like it's a highly productive team. And then part of it is that like we have a governing doc, clear rules of engagement. I mean, simple things also around like where work was coming from. We were getting work requests from like Slack messages. And so when you talk about like when doing that assessment, like where are you spending your time? And I asked that second follow-up, which is like, why? Finding out the work was coming from like IC requests via Slack. I'm like, oh, it's not centralized. My team didn't feel empowered to just say no. And it feels very personal when you say no in a Slack. So funneling things through like a request form, having like grading a criteria and like clear OKRs. Like, what are we focusing on? What matters to the business? So that when you say no, you can say like, it's not a no, it's a no, not now. And this is why. And really giving them that ammo was really important to me.
I love that. That's, I've taken over growth marketing once at a unicorn. And I think the mistake a lot of people make is they don't make decisions fast enough, right? And so the fact that you came in and they're like, hey, let's look at it all and make sure it's working for you is, I think, a lot more positive than let me listen for 90 days and then make decisions. And then it becomes hard to make decisions. So the biggest mistakes I've made as a new leader is generally not making decisions fast enough, right? And so I love the fact that you came in and did that and went through that exercise.
Our team mantra for this quarter and our fiscal quarter just started at the beginning of August is execution over perfection.
Yeah.
So just get it out the door.
I think especially in the world of AI, which I'm sure you think a lot about with marketing and Sendoso, is just the ability to ship. It's never going to be perfect, but you can iterate on it almost at a faster rate than you can before.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Well, we were talking earlier around just how do you find talent? You were talking about how you post roles and how you love people to kind of like find you, but I'd be fascinated to hear your philosophy on like finding talent, particularly senior talent, but all of it is great.
Yeah. Senior talent's so tough because so often when you're hiring a senior leader, you're not just looking for someone to come in and fill a role. You're looking oftentimes for a thought partner.
Yep.
and someone that you can have very real, hard conversations with behind closed doors. You can question the entire existence of your product and your company behind closed doors. And that requires a different level, not just like core competencies, but a different level of like flexibility, confidence, and grit. And so I know we were talking earlier about how oftentimes senior positions are posted online. I actually love posting senior positions online. Yes, I may not always hire from my online applicants, but I love doing that because I've been, very fortunate to have been with companies very early and seen very, fast growth trajectories. But oftentimes when you're joining a company on that type of growth path, it's chaos. Yeah. And I always say, like, you can capitalize on that chaos and make the best career decision of your life. But with it comes a ton of flexibility. You have to be, a ton of changes, I should say. It requires a ton of flexibility. And you have to be able to navigate obstacles that are thrown at you hourly. And so I love posting these roles online because I like to see the senior leaders who still have it in them, that still want to go and find their path into that role. And whether that's like going outbound and into like who their perceived hiring pool is and like trying to like get to me if I'm the hiring manager, for example, or tapping first and second connections so that I hear their name before I see the application. I love that. Like I want to see that from, especially when I'm in that, like when I'm hiring for someone on like a fast paced, high growth team. I
love that. It's fine. Like, even though Whispered is built around the unposted roles primarily, I think every role you find your thing. At Carta, I hired 2 very, very solid directors. I definitely worked my network first, but I then put them up and I found people that I would never have found otherwise. And I think particularly for like sales and marketing roles, people that can break down doors in interesting ways and get noticed. Yeah. What we're all trying to do in sales and marketing is like, how do we break through all the noise? And so people that can do that well. Do you have any stories or favorites where people have kind of broken through the noise to get to you?
Yeah, I had someone who actually, this is very fortunate. I work in an actual office. So if this video is ever seen by someone, please know I'm actually in the postal office. Like, I work in a very real office here in San Luis Obispo. So because of that is an address that is online. And someone found that address and mailed their resume, as well as their cover letter, specifically to me. It was addressed to me. And that's a little old school, but it was done in a very tongue-in-cheek way. Like, the cover letter was very tongue-in-cheek, given that we are a gifting company. And it was very much meant to be like, look, this is the power of direct mail. Like, I know I'm getting to your desk. And I thought that was very powerful.
I think direct mail / gifting can work so well. And so it can break through so much of this noise. It's powerful. That's why I've loved Sendoso / now Postal Sendoso for a long time. My favorite one was our CRO Carta received a bobblehead of himself. Tanner, your co-partner, said we don't do bobbleheads because they get messed up sometimes in production. But I was like, but that, even if it wasn't perfect, it was still so.
Oh yeah, the idea. I've seen bobbleheads before at Postal, and bobbleheads always land because even when they're not perfect, people in general, most people love making fun of themselves.
Yeah.
And like, that is something that even if it's a little off, you can bet their roommate, their spouse is going to take them and be like, oh, this is a humbling piece of memorabilia that we're going to keep in the house.
Or the bobblehead's on that desk forever and ever and
exactly.
ever. Right? So I think what's bad, and we could have a whole fun chat about this, was like the non-thoughtful stuff, right? Like, we're going to send socks, or we're going to send where they don't do thoughtful gifting, or we're going to send a plant, or we're going to send something. Like, I really want to make a statement to every person that I would send one of those gifts to really have them, like, a lot of this world is like, how do you make sure you're memorable in all cases? And so yes. I think like bobbleheads would be, maybe even though it's not about the how to hire, like, what is your favorite in your career at Postal / Sendoso, favorite like gifting experience you've ever heard? I'd be fascinated to.
My favorite gift was probably the cheapest thing I've ever received. And that's honestly why I love the story even more. It was from a BDR. I was actually prospected with Postal. So also love that even more. I was CRO at Postal. I was at a conference. I was at HubSpot Inbound actually last year in Boston. And I had met with the CEO and the VP of a company that was trying to sell Postal. They were also a customer of Postal. And in a conversation quickly after the like very high level pitch, the conversation immediately went to family because that's a great conversation and most people would love to talk all day about, especially if you have kids. And so I was saying how we just had a rainstorm in California. We don't get them very often. And my then 3-year-old had discovered slugs and worms for the first time. So I was saying how she was obsessed with them and how unbeknownst to her father and I, she had collected a bunch of them in a bucket and brought the bucket inside.
Oh.
So the next morning woke up and there were a lot of petrified slugs and worms on my kitchen table who had tried desperately to escape for water. So I shared the story. Husband and bananas, blah, blah, blah. A week or two later, I get a delivery to the postal office with 2 bags of Sour Patch gummy worms. And the note was from the BDR assigned to our account, tying back to that story, saying, these are for your daughter. Hopefully they don't dry up on the table. When the timing's right, would love to have a meeting. And that because it was relevant, it resonated with me and it felt sincere. And I absolutely did the pitch. I will forever send people to that vendor now because it was such a non-pressured, beautifully executed sales process. And it was sincere. And the sincerity is what matters.
I agree fully. It's like I've built great friendships with people that get to know me in the sales process. Okay, so here's the interesting thing. Does a Sendoso type concept work in an interview process? So here's the thing. Here's a theory I have. I've generally made up my mind 5 to 7 minutes in on an interview as the hiring manager. So I feel like no gift later on is going to change that decision. But I'd be curious your take of like, could you apply Postal Sendoso to the hiring process as a candidate? Mm-hmm. Or do you make up your mind early in the interview? Like where in that spectrum do you make it up?
Yeah, I absolutely, there's absolutely like a no-go, like a no-go that happens very early, 5-10 minutes in the interview. Absolutely.
Yeah.
But I have been in plenty of hiring circumstances where I'm sitting looking at 2 or 3 candidates that I love all equally. And I think all could do a great job for various reasons. In those cases, if it is a role that requires a level of creativity or grit, I think that gifting as a way to showcase your skills, not in the form of bribery, I think that's what you have to be careful of with interviews.
What's the listening, like the gummy worm versus the let me give you something expensive.
Exactly. I think then, if you're in the final 2 stages, I think that is where you can use it's a tool that you can use to show your skills. And that is how I would position it.
I could not agree more. I think if you then add like a granola or something that's listening, it could suggest like, hey, this gift might be insanely impactful, or you're just listening and scribbling that thing down of like, wow, that really spoke to me deeply. I think listening in the interview process and building personal relationships is good. I will be interested to find the first person that uses the gifting concept to work in the interview. So we'll both listen and learn on that.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
That's neat. We're talking a lot about like what types of talent you target. I think you were chatting about non-traditional talent. I'd be fascinated to hear how you think about profiles that you like and are interesting to you in the interview process.
Yeah. I've been really lucky to have been kind of like one of the first, if not the first person in seat a few times in my career. I was the first sales hire really at Reich when they were bootstrapped in the United States. I was the first person they sent internationally to build out go-to-market. I was the first person at Postal. I left Reich to start Postal. There was no product yet. I was a wild person to do it. And so I've been in a position many times to hire like the first seller, my first marketer, my first CSM. And as I've moved through my career, my leaders who I have reported to have become more tenured. And I find that like when you become more tenured, you become more accustomed to the bells and whistles. Like I expect Salesforce to do all the things. I expect to have like Gainsight immediately out the gate. And my job as the hiring manager oftentimes is the first, hiring the first line, I would say like line representatives, is to make sure that we are not hiring people who need bells and whistles, hiring people who believe heavily in our mission, because I don't need a VP of sales when I'm like under $10 million in revenue. I need someone who is going to actually be executing deals and validating if we have a repeatable go-to-market motion.
Yeah.
Or we need to call it quits and bounce. I don't need someone to build a customer journey. I need someone to tell me what the customer journey is. So
I like that.
So finding those people who want to be missionaries, my very best sales hires historically, and I'm talking about ICs here, have all come from non-traditional backgrounds. You think that cold calling is hard. Yes, cold calling is hard. But do you think cold calling is hard for someone who's been a bartender at 2 a.m. is trying to kick out a frat house? No, cold calling's not that hard. Cold calling's, I love hiring moms who have decided to come back to their career after having kids as BDRs. One, they know how to work hard, the hardest working people on the team. But two, you're going to hang up on them, please. They've been dismissed by their teenager multiple times today. So I think the parents, caregivers, and then, ex-hospitality make incredible additions to sales teams. Also to go back to parents, I'll double click on that. I find that they have oftentimes incredible EQ.
Yes.
They're navigating very complex small kids, I'm in the small kid age. I have a 4-year-old right now. Small kids, you have a lot of little problems, a lot of them, but they're little. The older the kids get, you have less problems, but they're bigger problems. And parents it's their EQ is getting tested on a daily basis. And so you put them, eventually, they work into management positions, and they tend to be wonderful people leaders because they are people leaders at home.
I always say that, which small kids, small problems, big kids, big problems. That one you hear a lot. But you will become a better leader of people by being a parent. Not to say if you don't want to have kids, you don't have to have them, but you learn a lot, especially as they start to get 9, 10, 11, where they start testing you, and then teenagers as well. Mm-hmm. So I deeply agree with that. I think the returning mothers, or in some cases fathers too, I've seen some of that trend as well, it's a really hard time also to search for something if you've taken that time off. So I think deeply people viewing that as a positive. I think that is a positive. It's just when you've got that hole in the resume, it can be really hard.
Oh yeah. And it's brutal. And there are some incredible organizations out there that are trying to attract that demographic to give them a refresh on the tools that honestly, they probably already have. They just need the confidence to use them.
Yeah.
And if you're listening to this and you fall into that category, there are plenty of them out there. I highly recommend them. We hire from one of those organizations, and great talent has come from it.
That's really cool. I love that. So let's maybe shift over to, how do you evaluate people once they've gotten to you, you're interviewing them, figure you're the hiring manager. Do you have a structure and an interview process? Do you have a favorite interview question?
So depending on the role, my interview process will change. I have a probably mildly controversial opinion on things like case studies or asking candidates to do a ton of legwork.
Yeah.
One of the reasons I don't like it, I'll say it now. And I think
me neither. Yeah.
Well, it's somewhat controversial because I know a lot of companies do it. I have a big issue against it, primarily because I think that if I was in their shoes, I would feel like I'm doing a ton of paid labor, and they might walk away with my playbook, use it, and I'll never hear anything from them. And that has definitely happened to me. It's happened to plenty of my friends. So I have a big issue against it. And I think that as a hiring manager and as a company with the role, I think there are easier, less time-consuming ways to test someone. Google's maybe 10 years ago now, and I think it's included in one of the books that have been published, but they said that it takes 3 45-minute interviews, no matter what level, to determine whether or not someone is a good fit for the role.
Yeah.
So when you start seeing 6 interviews, a 6-hour case study presentation of board members, that is an organization that is probably suffering from an inability to make decisions.
I would absolutely agree. You see sometimes of that, where they haven't fully defined the role. They're not quite sure. And it's when the worst is when the interview cycle stretches out. I had a scenario where my CEO wanted to get involved late stage, and all of a sudden it's a sign that executive decision-making is not that good. And
yes.
I completely agree with you on that.
Yeah. So I don't like doing long case studies. The only time then this is the things I'll ask for is like, how do you prioritize? So I'll ask them if the leader's coming in for marketing or for sales, I'll ask them how they would, based off what they know today, how they would prioritize like an assessment of the team. So I'll ask them to kind of, and that usually I'm talking like whether that's in a document or like 2 slides, but nothing heavy. My favorite homework assignment that I've ever given is I used to hire for support teams. So I managed support at 2 of my previous roles. And I used to ask them to write a help center article on how to make toast.
Oh, yes. Yes.
Because oftentimes when you become an expert at a tool, it's really easy to assume people understand things. So those are kind of like, that's how I feel about homework. My favorite interview questions would be, I have 2 of them that I love to ask that have nothing to do. You can use them for any role whatsoever. The first is, what are you most proud of? And I will then sit there and provide absolutely no color to that question and wait for either of them to ask. So 50% of candidates will ask me, do you mean personally or professionally? 50% of candidates will sit there, think, and then provide me with an answer. Sometimes it's personal, sometimes it's professional. Really what I am looking for is ideally they do not ask for clarification. I want someone to be self-assured in how they're going to answer that question, because there's no really right or wrong in an interview, in my opinion. But what I'm looking for is what motivates that individual. And I want to ensure that this is a role that can get them to that value. Sometimes people answer with things like, I am most proud of, building my last team I started. I was an IC and I went to manager and I built it to 10 people.
Yeah.
Sometimes the answer is, I grew up in low income housing and I just bought my first apartment. And so I am trying to understand who is this individual, and how, if I'm going to be their manager, I'm going to be building this role around them, how am I going to make sure that like I best support them? The other question that I love to ask is, what is the last thing that you taught someone? And tell me about how, like, what was it and how did it go? How did you go about teaching them?
This kind of goes through your toast one as well too.
Yes, exactly. And because every single leader is put in a position daily to teach someone something. Whether that is teaching the audience about who your company is and what you're aiming, what you're bringing to market and what your mission, your vision is, whether that is the person next to you who needs to take on new scope or responsibility, or if that's a cross-functional leader that you need to help tell the story of like why we're changing the way that we're doing things in our org. Like, teaching is also storytelling. And so I want to hear how somebody handles themselves when teaching something.
The other one I've heard is teach me something, right? Like the not just toast, but it's almost like write the help article on anything you want. Another person told me there when this was an interesting one. She said, define the color yellow. And that one's or describe the color yellow to somebody who's blind. I thought was a really interesting one to be able to hear how people deal with those. But I'm also with you on I'm not going to make you do it. I think for me, it's like I'm caring deeply about, do I understand how you tick, and do you understand how I tick, and will we work together? Because I think that is like 80% of it. It's the mesh of the 2 people. So one tactic I've always used is I write my own user manual, and I maintain it and I keep it. And then every time I do a 360, people do it. So every time I work with people, I share that early on. And I say, listen, I don't expect you to write one. Here's mine. I'm happy to talk about yours. And literally when I'm interviewing senior level people, half the people will be like, cool, take the half hour to write their own, or take the like 2 hours to write their own. And then it becomes an asset for them in the future. But like, I tick the way I tick and you tick the way you tick. And, we can both adapt a little bit, but why don't you figure that stuff out about me right now versus get surprised by it later?
I mean, it goes back to that thought leader conversation. Like you gotta be able to work together, because you're going to be solving really complex problems together. Yes.
And so that mesh and that mentality, it's funny. Like in Whispered, we tell people, a lot of people are like, well, I'm competing against other people that are also in Whispered. I'm like, no, not really. One of my favorite quotes was, the biggest surprise about Whispered is I'm not actually competing with other execs that are in there, because there's so many differences, right? It's like, you're in San Luis Obispo, you have this experience, you've sold this type of customers, this type of buyer, this is the way your personality works versus somebody else. There's 1,000 reasons why you're going to get the job versus somebody else. And so I think it's been really fun to watch within Whispered that people are very much comfortable. We always ask, like, what's the biggest surprise 30 days in? And everyone's like, the biggest surprise, both the power of the network and B, the fact that I'm not competing against other people. And I think that's it truly is like the reasons you get jobs are for so many reasons other than just what you've done.
Mm-hmm. It's true. It's true. And, I've worked very closely with quite a few founders now. And more often than not, what they won't say, in public, what they'll say behind closed doors is they're just looking for a teammate.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like as simple as it is. Yeah, you're going to own this part of the business. But like, really, I just need someone that I can hit my head against the wall with.
Yeah. And then they're going to push me and like manage up to me as well.
Exactly. I mean, and I think that kind of goes to where I'd say like after you go through the interview process, you talk about like the first like 30 days or so. And like, how do you know if someone's succeeding? It's being able to like confidently disagree, I think is so important. And so often that is what, when I'm managing up, my ability to communicate effectively and confidently disagree, but sometimes also means that like I'm disagreeing, but committing is important. And so when I look at like people that I hire in the first like 30, 60, 90 days, I'll give them the first few weeks. I want them to assess the business. I want them to get to know the business. But then I expect them to be confident in their business.
Yes.
And I want them to start confidently making decisions. And in the first, if by we get to like day 45 and they are not confidently making decisions, even small ones, huge red flags start flaring.
Yes. If they're looking for your context, Patty, what do I do? Patty, how would you handle this? You're like, at some point you need them to do
exactly.
that. I find my style is incredibly direct and it can scare some people. And I'm like, no, like I do want you to disagree with me. I think some people are like, oh, Andy wants exactly what he wants it. But I think that user manual has opened up the permission that like, oh, he may be incredibly direct and to the point and telling you exactly what he thinks, but he does want to hear how you're thinking about it. So I've observed that my own style can shut down exactly what you want. So I've tried to create it, but I like how you're looking and listening for that. How else do you make new hires successful?
Do I make them successful? One of the most important things that, I think it's one of the most important things that I do early is I set up meetings with all cross-functional leaders.
Yes. And
I provide an agenda with what I want them to discuss.
Yes.
Because I want this person to be acutely aware of what makes all of the other leaders tick. I find that so often you come into a role and you're like hyper obsessed, like, okay, they gave me the scope. These are my KPIs. I must go, go, go. And every role within an organization has ripple effects that impact the members around them, and especially like as a senior member of the team. And they need to understand what makes their colleagues tick so that when they go to make a big decision or make a big change, they can tell a story that sells it very effectively. Like why does this matter to me? Can they sell that story? To whether it's, for me, I'm hiring marketing right now, but like head of CS, head of sales, head of people, head of product, etc. And so I think it's super important that they understand that.
I totally agree. Yeah, I'm always doing here's the personality of this person, here's the personality. Like if you can save them, sometimes it can take a while to understand how somebody ticks, right? And if you can save them that, or like, hey, this person may appear this way, but they're like, I was like, this person's amazing at the executive and up, but they poop on the people that work for them. And like that could take you 5 months to figure out, or you could step on it in the wrong way. And if you know that early, you're able to navigate those situations so much.
Exactly.
That's cool. Any hiring mishires, like stories you've got, mistakes you've made and lessons you've learned?
Yeah. I mean, I think everyone probably has their like closet of skeletons with mishires. I have this saying now, which is, I look for missionaries, not mercenaries, when I'm building a team for the first time or I'm building a company for the first time, because of like the inherent change that oftentimes being the first brings. But I got a little too comfortable once, and this is a couple of years back at a different company. I got a little too comfortable. My organization was big. So I worked at a bigger organization, big team, but I was hiring the first of a department. And this department did not exist. It was a sales function, and I went looking for a director level. Compensation was approved for director level. I felt like that was the right title. And I hired someone with a very, very beautiful CV. It was quite sexy, had all the big logos on it. I'm talking like old school tech. Like we had Dell, we had HP, we had Microsoft on there. And I was like, okay, this is going to be my director of this team. And he came in, and when he realized that it was a brand, he knew it was a brand team, but like, I don't think he realized, or clearly we must have missed the mark in the interview process, where he's like, oh, you have to build the team. You have to build the process. We don't know how you're going to go to market. So you have to build that. You have to partner with marketing on like how, what your story, what the story you're going to tell, what customer references you're going to use. That is where we started to fall off about. And so he reverted back to like what he was used to, because when you're nervous as a human, you go back to like, okay, I know how to do these things. So he started doing like the things he knew really, really well. The problem was that didn't move the needle because we didn't have a team. And we didn't have a go-to-market. We didn't have a go-to-market motion. And we were effectively stagnant. And it took me 6 months to be able to call that one. And it was a painful 6 months.
And then it's the 3 or 4 months after that, you've got to refill the role and the confidence of the team and all the people that they've hired. Yeah.
We lost confidence in the whole program. It took, I kid you not, a full year to recover from that.
Every executive hire, if it's a mishire, it's a year to a year and a half mistake.
Yeah.
The one thing I always love is I love people that have been at big and seen great, because they know what greatness looks like, but they've also been at small and know how to hustle. And I think you see that profile of only been at big and great, and then they come in. I see a lot of like VPs of sales at places, but they've never actually run enablement. And so then they're like, I can be a CRO at a small company. I'm like, you're gonna get destroyed. So I see it's like being able to build all those competencies and get your hands a little bit dirty and hustle is something that not everyone's cut out for.
A leader at a smaller company, anything like sub 20 million, you are juggling way more balls than a VP or the same title at a much larger organization. Yeah, they have more red tape and they might have more revenue under their remit, but like you have way more balls in your court.
I couldn't agree more. It's it becomes harder and easier as you scale, right? Like the problems are just big company problems, small company problems. And that, there's that 15 to 20 is about where I would draw that line too, where it's a different type of business for sure.
Absolutely. I guess it's kind of like parenting. I just made the connection there, small company, a lot of small problems, big company, few problems.
You got one big ball. Yes.
Yeah.
This was an amazing conversation. I loved it in so many levels. I'm going to watch out for the first person to Sendoso Postal me to try to I'm going to look for that story. I'm curious if you and Tanner and Chris have seen that story of like people actually using Sendoso for job search.
Oh, I know. We're gonna have to start promoting that. I don't know. We got to figure out what the playbook is and make one.
Yeah, that little PLG app that I know you guys have been building that should be ready now. So it's good.
Yeah. No, hey, Postal had it. Might be why it was acquired.
I was on Team Sendoso, but now I'm on Team Sendoso Postal. Well, thank you so much for this. This was an amazing conversation, Patty.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. Love what you guys are doing.
Thank you.